So the thing about entering the Mishkan, if it is a model for the kingdom of Yod He Vav He. See, we say, well, the kingdom of heaven, or the kingdom of God. As we mentioned before, in Hebrew, the word spelled Gimel Dalet, is pronounced Gad or God. It happens to be the name, the phonetic soundbite of the deity of fortune and luck, and it was a Canaanite deity. So, and I mentioned this once before the previous week, I was at a restaurant. It was actually called the Phoenician Grill years ago. It's not there anymore, down in Milwaukee here. And then there's a picture up on the a sign up on behind the counter, and it said, "In God we trust." It's like, well, that's pretty nice. I said, "Which God?" He said, "Allah." We can assume, because we use common names, words, God, that we're all talking about the same guy. Not necessarily. But when you use the word Yod He Vav He, that's very specific. Especially if when you think of the Yod, you talk about the Creator. Right there, you're going to lose most of the people that may believe in a deity or some various deities or a pantheon of deities like the Greeks and Romans, none of which may happen to be a creator. So instead of using the word God or Lord, Lord itself is actually a title. Here, let's look at Lord for a moment. The word Lord. If you look at it in King James, and it's written in all capital letters, some Bibles will tell you that actually every time it's written in all capital letters, this word Yod He Vav He is what it's referring to. And if it's written in lowercase letters, it probably refers to the word Adonai. There might be an A in here, which is a title. But actually in Hebrew, the word Baal, which means basically a master, is the same as the word Lord, which is the title of a lesser deity. So they would have a Baal of the mountains, a Baal of the valleys, a Baal of the winter, one of the summer, one of the this or the that. It's these the demigods, you might say, lesser deities that each have they're actually principalities. So when he says on day 4, he put the sun to rule the day, the moon to rule the night, and the stars in their seasons, the word seasons is moedim. The word moedim is actually the same word for the festivals, which are the appointed gatherings. So there's two ways to read that verse. One is to say, he lined up the stars. The word for constellations is mazarot. Ot is the plural, so mazar would be something that spins, and that's a constellation. But anyway, he put the mazarot in their places according to the moedim. Well, one way to read that is that he determined the festivals before he determined the 7-day sequence, and then having decided the festivals are in Leviticus 23. We just went through this, where it says, okay, this is Pesach, unleavened bread, Shavuot, which is counting weeks, and then those are the spring feasts. Summertime, a break, a Selah. And then the fall feasts. Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shemini Atzeret. Notice that there's a break. The Mishkan pattern is that you got the big white fence, the altar of sacrifice, and the laver. Those line up with the 3 spring feasts, Pesach, Chag Matzot, and Shavuot. That's the first month, and the counting, of course, goes more than the first month. And then there's the summer. And then you've got the fall feasts, starting the 7th month. Yom Teruah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shemini Atzeret. So there's this natural break. So too with the Mishkan, you've got the big white fence, the altar of sacrifice, and the laver outside in the courtyard. Break. Under the covering, you've got the things that are inside what's called the holy place in English, or what's called the kadosh place. For the kadoshim, only the priests, the Levites, could go in there. The Kohanim would be the priests, the Levites were the workers. And then in the most set-apart place, the kadosh kodashim, the holy of holies, once a year, as Jamie said, only the high priest, the Kohen HaGadol, could go in on Yom Kippur and offer the blood of the atonement on the mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant. So you have these gates of more and more set apart. Just like each day, he separated day and night, separated water from water, separated water from land. Then he separated the sun, moon, the stars in their moedim. Then he separated fish in the sea, birds in the air. And then he separated the animals and man from the animals. Everything's about separation. Everything's about refining, separation, refining, more and more and more separate. You get to choose how separate you want to be. All through the book of Jeremiah, which I don't think we'll get a chance to go through, I encouraged people to read Jeremiah a couple weeks ago, and I was going to read through, but I could sit here and read Jeremiah for an hour and read you certain things. All through Jeremiah, he talks about Israel being separated from the rest of the nations. The benefits and the responsibilities of separating out Israel. So here's a question about Lord. Let me go back to that real fast. If you look in the dictionary, the word resh dalet has to do where we get the word radiate, something which extends out. Also a road. And it has to do, lamed is an authority. So here you might have the letter lamed, and here's a resh and a dalet. Of course, you'd read it back the other way. And there's a vav in the middle. That's a bridge or a connection. But here, it'd be a lamed vav resh dalet. But a resh dalet has to do with a road or something trampled and stomped flat. And the lamed, as shepherd staff, has to do with an authority. So the Lord technically is someone who has the authority to tread down flat and dominate and spread out his ways. Technically, that's Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh can be seen as somebody like that. But what he's doing is actually calling a people to his desire who will do what he says because they want to, out of their heart. He says in another place, I think it's in Jeremiah also, he says, when I gave you the commandments, it wasn't a list of sacrifices I wanted. The sacrifices, the list of sacrifices came later. Read Leviticus chapter 4 and Leviticus chapter 5. There's a whole long list of sacrifices, and if you'll notice, every single one of them was for the unintentional sin. There was not a sacrifice for intentional sin. So we say, well, the Christian teaching is that Jesus died on the cross to save us from our sins. Which sins? Which sacrifice did his death replace? Was it the Thanksgiving sacrifice? Well, no. We still say thanks, and we can bring a sacrifice of what? Was it go through the list? My point is this. The Passover lamb was not a sacrifice for sin. The Day of Atonement goat was a sacrifice for sin. And it said it covered and did away with it. And we were told by Paul that, he said it didn't really do away with it. It just kind of covered it. Well, that's not according to the Old Testament scriptures. It says they were done away with. My point is we've inherited convoluted doctrines. And the only way to figure out what's really going on is to go back to the language. So the reason I call him Yahweh, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, Yahuwah, there's different ways to pronounce it, but it's Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. It's the Creator. It's the giver of the Torah. It's the one who sent the Mashiach, incorporated into human flesh to show us what to do, who we ripped the back out of him, who told us to keep his ways of righteousness. And what's righteousness? Doing what he said, which is chesed to one another, justice and kindness to one another, and loving him, which means keeping his name and his day. And his day includes the festivals according to Leviticus 23. So one thing I've tried to do, in thinking of his name, when I think of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, I think the Creator, the giver of the Torah, the Mashiach, the sent one to come in human form, and me doing what he said, which is righteousness, which is chesed to one another, and keeping his name in his day. That's loving him and loving our neighbor as ourselves. That's it. That's Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. But when I think of Lord, I don't think of that. When I think of God, I don't think of that. When I think of Adonai or Hashem, I don't think of that. But when I think of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, Yahweh, that's what I think about. So to train my mind is to think on his name. The interesting thing is, you go back to the Mishkan, the big white fence, the letter Chet. It's a big white fence. I've drawn the pattern like this. It's a big white fence with four colors, a four-colored door. It's technically blue, purple, red, with gold threads, white linen. So blue, purple, red, white is technically the four colors, but the white linen is not really one of the colors of the embroidery. It's around the embroidery. So anyway, blue, purple, red, white, the big white fence. In other words, when you're looking at this big white fence, you're not just seeing a white fence. It has this big door. The blue, purple, red with gold door. So, on your own house, you maybe have a street number, or you maybe have your last name, but typically on your house, you have some form of identification as to whose house it is. Well, if you just see a big tent with four colors, whose house is that? Well, there's a flag. Whose house is that? Well, I know that I recognize red, white, and blue. That's America. Well, if I recognize that blue, purple, red, and white linen is Yahweh's name in colors, that's what I think of. So when I see, oh, the big white fence with blue, purple, red with gold, the blue, purple, red, and white and gold, that's Yahweh's name. That's his name on his kingdom. So the fence doesn't represent just only the fence of the Mishkan and everything inside of it, but it's his kingdom and everything he stands for and everything he represents. It's his Shem. And remember, over the Mishkan, more specifically, inside the Mishkan was the Ark of the Covenant, inside that Kadosh Kodashim, the set-apart place. And above that, when he was present, you might say, was this pillar of fire, pillar of smoke that spread out over the whole camp, essentially the letter Kuf, above the letter Zadi, the Zadi having to do with the Ark of the Covenant, to just fill in that. But so here you have this box with this lid covering. And this is the Chet, the fence, and the covering of the Chet, like the Kuf. So here you have, when Yahweh's presence is in the Mishkan, over the fence, over the camp of Israel, and everything in the Mishkan, remember, represents his stuff. The 7 days, the 7 festivals, the Mishkan pattern, keyed to the alphabet, is all his stuff of his design. Interesting enough that the word spelled Het Kuf, Chok, means commandment. And we were told the commandments were done away with. You see, if we take them in an English word and say, oh boy, Jesus died on the cross, no more of them commandments, what you're doing is throwing out the treasure box with the lid of his Shekinah presence and saying, really? Did Yeshua being crucified do away with the entire kingdom of Yahweh that he promised our forefathers, that if we did what he said, he would restore? Read the scriptures. That's not what it says. Now, I'm not saying Yeshua's death on the cross didn't accomplish something, but the question is, what did it accomplish? The only way to know what it accomplished is to go back to the language and say, what did he say? You read in Jeremiah, and it says certain priests, certain teachers, preachers go out and say, oh, I have this dream. And he said, have they been exposed to the mystery of Yahweh? If they've been exposed to the mystery of Yahweh, then let them tell the people, go back and do what Yahweh said. And then he says, what does the chaff have compared to the kernel? He said, my word is a fire that burns the chaff and like a hammer that smashes a rock. I'm quoting from Jeremiah. Go back and read Jeremiah. He says that if a guy's going to be talking about anything, he should be talking about Yahweh's word. But we did not inherit Yahweh's word. We inherited English based on Latin, based on Greek, based on Aramaic, based on Phoenician distortion of Hebrew. And this is talking about looking what these letters are and going back to the pictures that identify everything about it. I'm not trying to say let's study the word chok, meaning the grammar of the word chok. I'm saying that when you see the word chok, it's the picture of the big white fence and the pillar of fire, pillar of smoke of Yahweh's physical regard of his presence with his people over the top of the encampment of Israel. Was there anything better ever? Oh, you could say, well, yeah, Yeshua walking in our midst. Well, he came incognito. They didn't even know who he was until after he rose from the dead. And like, oh, that's who he was. He said, who do people say I am? Oh, they're guessing all kinds of different things. And then when Peter said, oh, you're the sent one. You're the Christ. Well, that's not what he said, because that wasn't Hebrew. He might have said Mashiach, but he says, you're the sent one from Elohim. He says, you didn't figure that out. Flesh and blood didn't tell you that. My Father must have told you. He knew that his disguise, like the ghillie suit, was so good that even his disciples would not have been able to logically, rationally, intellectually determine who he was. He had a good disguise. So we cannot look back and blame the Jews and say, they killed their Messiah. He did not come looking like a Messiah. You can't go back in the Scriptures and find a description of the Messiah that's like a glove and say, well, isn't this the one who fits the glove? Oh, if it fits, then you must consider he's the one. There is no place other than the Hebrew alphabet. I propose that the Hebrew alphabet is the description of the Mashiach, because the Hebrew alphabet is Yahweh's face revealed, which is his Torah expressed, which is the Mashiach doing everything it says in perfect form as a human being, who said, you guys should do it too. So it also then, the Hebrew alphabet describes everything that we as humans should do as regarding righteousness unto Yahweh, fulfilling his desire. And once you know the language, once you see the pictures in the alphabet, it's all in there, and it's all pretty easy. And so one thing I've tried to do, and especially I'll mention the book of Jeremiah again, go back and say, okay, what's the central theme? There's about 50-something chapters, but look at about the first 30 or so. Yahweh keeps going on and on and on about something. What is it? If you're reading the book as history, you'll miss the point. If you're saying, okay, Jeremiah is just going off, he's like, so upset about something, you've just missed it. What is the point? I could open it up, but I don't know if we have time for doing it, but might be worth it here. Yahweh keeps saying the same thing. I spoke, and you didn't listen. I said to do something, and you said no. And that's all he says, all through the book, every time. I said to do something, and you guys said, no, we don't have to. We don't want to. We're not going to. And said, all right. Your enemies are going to come in then. Like the dead man trapped to you, like the Romans tying a dead man to you. How do you get the guy off your back? You turn to do life. What's life? The stuff inside the Chet. What's the stuff inside the Chet? Yahweh's business. And he made it so difficult for us. You will not work on the seventh day, the Sabbath day. You will not work. Oh, he's so mean. How am I supposed to do that? He's such a big monster that I have to not work on the seventh day. Well, I'll tell you, that's the way it felt to me when I first started doing it. It felt like he was a big, mean monster. Once you start doing it, you go, wow. You spend all your time working so you can get a house, so you can plant a garden, and you can toil in the garden so you can grow some flowers, but you can't enjoy it because every Saturday you got to go out there and dig in the flower garden. No, you don't. Tell you what, on Saturday, step outside and just look at the flowers. In fact, sit down and listen to the birds. In fact, lay down and stare at the sky. That's fulfilling the commandment of the Sabbath day. Don't pick up the vacuum cleaner. Don't pick up the gardening tool. Just enjoy what you've just spent 6 days laboring for. That's his commandment for the Sabbath day. And we paint him out to be such a monster. Don't work your farm on the 7th year. On the 50th year, everything goes back to the original landowners. You know, he is such a benevolent, kind Elohim, and we have painted him wrong year after year after year. Go back and read Jeremiah and find out what his complaint was. His complaint against his people is that they would not do kindness to each other. So what's the door into the Mishkan? I said back at the week of the Dalet that if you look at the word for chesed, chet, samik, Dalet, the Dalet is a door, it's a choice, it's that which opens. Chet is like this fence, which is something closed. And samik is, you might say, it's like the menorah, but it's also an engineered structure. It's a trellis, it's something designed. Well, something designed to cause to open. Of course, we said pei zadi was mouth that opens, but the door is something that opens. So an engineered structure that causes something to open like a door, well, that's like a key. And so here you have the key to the fence. Could it be that we're sitting there saying, can we please have the kingdom back? Can we please have the kingdom back? And just like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, it's like, you could have gone home anytime. Just click your heels together. See those ruby slippers? Click your ruby heels together and say, I want to go home. We could have had the kingdom back anytime. All we had to do was do chesed to one another. But we would not. Oh, no. Read all through the Scriptures. And when I say we, I'm talking about anybody written about in the Scriptures. Look at our forefathers, Israel and Yehuda, and you'll see all these stories about how they just tormented, brutalized, oppressed, pillaged each other. And Yahweh says, I brought you into the most beautiful land on the face of the earth. And you guys abominated it. You wrecked it. So I'm throwing you out. Giving it to somebody else for a while. Let the land have its Sabbaths. And when you guys want to come back, you can come back when you want to come back. What do we come back to? Book of Jeremiah again. If you return, that word return is teshuvah. If you return to me. Yod-Heh Vav-Heh. What does it mean to return to him? To his stuff. Inside the fence, with the lid being the kuf. The chok, his commandments. Oh, there we go with the commandments again. What are the commandments? Do chesed one to another. Tender loving kindness. Read the word in the Red Dictionary. Look at all the meanings. It also means shame, rebuke, and scolding. Now, why would the same word chesed be shame, rebuke, and scolding, but also tender loving kindness? It's because our lack of tender loving kindness is what all this scolding and shame and rebuke is all about. It's very simple. Be good to one another. That's the commandment. If you look at the 10 Commandments, that when he talks about loving your neighbors yourself, here's another interesting little thing in Hebrew. The word for evil, wicked, is reshayin. It might be even with a reshayin hey sometimes, but evil, wicked, ra. Well, reshayin is also the word for neighbor. Your neighbor is reshayin with a kaf. Kaf as a suffix at the end means your. Love your neighbor as yourself. You could read this as love your evil wicked as yourself. Well, you should have said bless your enemy. But why should the word reshayin mean evil, wicked, harm, distress, and also be the word for neighbor, associate, compatriot, the fellow that you walk down the road with? So part of dissecting or translating or making use of the dictionary to figure out this language, that kind of stumped me for a while, and I pondered it for probably a couple of years and saying, where's the connection? Some of them are pretty easy. You can see the connections. For example, this is a bit of a tangent, but one of the words here that starts with in fact, I think I have it right here. The word Het Samek, these two letters, Het Samek, also means protected and sparing. Actually, protected is Het Samek Vav Yod, but the Vav Yod is kind of an ending that just means existence. Like we were saying before, anything with Yod, Hey, Vav, and Hey has to do with existence. So why should this be protected and sparing? Het Samek Hey means to seek refuge, but it's also the word for lettuce, like you put in your salad. So here, do some sephering. Why should the word for lettuce be the exact same word as sparing, protected, and seek refuge? Now look at this. Het is a fence. Samek, like a picture of the menorah, has to do with, if you flip a menorah around on top of itself, it looks like if you drop a pebble into the pond and it sends out ripples. It's the pattern. It's a ripple pattern. Do you see a connection yet? Sparing, protected, seek refuge, and lettuce. With a het and a samek. If you were a bug and you crawled into a head of lettuce, wrapped around and around, seeking refuge, that's a pretty good place to go, wouldn't it be? See the pictures in the word? But yet in the dictionary, for the word for Het Samek Hey, for seek refuge or lettuce, it says from an unknown origin. So Ernest Klein isn't trying to make these leaps of sephering, putting pictures together, which I'm trying to do. But I'm trying to look at these words and saying, what is seeking refuge? Chesed, lettuce, wrapped around and around. You take these pictures and it jumps back to, I think it's Ezekiel 43, and it says, if you go through the whole thing, and from Ezekiel about 36, he talks about the changing everything from the curse to the blessing, you might say. 37 is the restoration of the house of Israel. And then Ezekiel goes into about 4 or 5 chapters describing this new temple, which has actually never been built. And so they don't know whether it's a metaphorical temple, or whether it's this heavenly vision, or whether it's one that's going to be made one day on the face of the earth, or maybe it's in the millennial kingdom. But nevertheless, he talks about it, and then all of a sudden he wraps it up. I might have it written down here. Ezekiel 43, I think it is. He says, Ezekiel 43, verse 10, calculate the design, he says, of the temple. Talking to the house of Israel, he says, if they become humiliated, then tell them about the rest of it. This het is a fence. The reason why we're saying, look, if you don't listen to these first 7, don't even waste your time with the rest of it. Yahweh puts distinctions, separations. He says, let me tell you what's going on. And if you guys can listen to the story that's all through Jeremiah, that's all through Deuteronomy, that's all through Ezekiel and Isaiah and Leviticus and Exodus and Hosea and Amos, and you read the whole thing and you realize, we went astray. We've inherited a lot of stuff that isn't so. We need to come back to the Torah. And it's as hard as doing chesed to one another, and to know Yahweh's name and his day, and to regard them with honor. That's it. And the way you regard his name and his day is that when you speak of his name, speak of his name. And when you guard his name and his day, keep his day. Don't work on the days that he said not to work. That's about as hard as this gets. And what do you wrap yourself up in? His stuff. So when he says, this is the teaching regarding the temple, all on the mountaintop, and you could say, what does that mean? But he says, Saviv, Saviv, Kadosh, Kodashim. And it's translated, all around the mountaintop will be considered most holy. Well, you go over to Jerusalem and you look at that, and there's nothing Kadosh about this. A Turkish Saracen, Islamic, Crusader, Catholic, it's a melting pot of religions and cultures on the top of that mountain. There's nothing Kadosh. The only way for that to be Kadosh, I'm certain, would be for the whole place to get blown up, and for Yahweh to bring it down to bare earth and say, now it's Kadosh. What he made. He even said if you make an altar, just take unhewn stones, round stones out of the river. That's how you build an altar. There's nothing kadosh up on that mountain. But what's this saviv, saviv? It's translated around and around because saviv, the letter samech, has to do with ripples. Ripples. And it seems to me that what it was saying, and this is my own determination, is that like a drop in the water, if we start doing something kadosh, like learning his language, regarding his name, regarding his day, it will become kodashim. A pebble in the pond will send out ripples. And as the ripples keep progressing, around and around, saviv, saviv, kadosh, kodashim. And then you read Ezekiel 36:23, and he says, I will make my Shem Gadol, my great name, kadosh, when you make my Shem Gadol kadosh, which you have made halal. We talked about that. Het lamed lamed, where we get the word hell, the 8th letter, H-L-L, which you have made halal, hollowed out, profane, perforated, drained of anything, rendered common and worthless. We, collectively, over the years, have made his stuff worthless. And he says, when you make my stuff kadosh, then I will make it kadosh. If we make it kadosh, he will make it kodoshim. We have to do something. We can't sit here and wait for him to, oh, gee, it's about time. We've got the ruby slippers. Click your heels and say, I want to go home. I want to go home, not to Candace. We want to go back home to the Mishkan. We want to come back inside the fence. And when you come back inside the fence, what do? Right inside the gate was the altar of sacrifice. It has to do with Chag HaMatzot, which is the feast of unleavened bread. You separate leaven from leaven. You then learn his ways. But there's different patterns here. If we look at the Shabbat as being the Zion, is the 7th day, does this mean you can't enter the fence unless you keep Shabbat? No! Because you don't learn about Shabbat until you enter the fence. Learning his Torah is what it is about studying. And then you go back to the Jerusalem Council. What is it, Acts 15? And Paul and Peter and James and all, they said, what do we do about these goyim, these Gentiles that are coming to the kingdom? Do we require of them to be circumcised and they keep all these things and jump these hurdles and jump through hoops? And it's like, no. We're going to tell them to do 4 things. Well, you might say this list of 4 things was the Zion outside the Chet. He says, because Moshe is preached or taught every Sabbath day in the synagogue, they can come and learn, but we have to keep them away from 4 things. Why those 4 things? Because in the Christian gospel, those 4 things don't even count. So why would the apostles burden the Gentiles with 4 things that don't even matter once you learn the gospel? If you read those 4 things, it's don't eat blood, don't eat anything strangled, don't eat things offered to idols. 3 things having to do with food, and yet they'll tell you by saying this, Yeshua made all things clean. When he says not what goes into the mouth and what comes out, obviously something is disconnected there. So when there's a question about what does the New Testament say versus what does the Old Testament say, and what's what, you have to simply look. If he declared all foods to be clean, why would the apostles, after he was resurrected and ascended, come up with 3 food items to put the burden on the Gentiles for, only to come inside and learn and say, oh, they don't matter anyway? It makes no sense. Those 3 things will pollute you bodily. The 4th thing was don't commit fornication. Why? Because if you do those 4 things, when you strangle an animal, it puts the hormones and the adrenaline and everything into the blood, and then when you drink the blood, you take on those animal characteristics. Some cultures drink animal blood just for that reason, and they get them into a frenzy first, so they really get juiced up. Things offered to idols supposedly would have demonic effect. Yahweh said in the book of Leviticus, he said, the blood and the fat are mine. They're not yours. Do not eat the fat and the blood. That's my food. If you eat fat and blood, you're going to Yahweh. You can say, oh, there's no law, so it doesn't matter. Oh, read the book of Leviticus and then do that to him. Or does it matter? Is it serious? Was he telling us the truth? When you commit fornication with somebody, you're blending with somebody else, and now all of a sudden you're changing your disposition. I think what the apostles were saying is, if you're serious about entering this kingdom, do these 4 things which will give you a sane mind so that when you come into the door, you can learn his ways. So there's different models. What is this het? Some might say, oh, this het, this fence, this represents salvation. So because Yeshua was crucified outside the fence, which is another picture of the Zion, the Vav man Zion, the man slain outside the het, that to enter this Mishkan fence is salvation. Is it? Yeshua said in the book of Revelation, when he appeared to John, he said, those who overcome, those who endure to the end, he says in Matthew and in Mark, if you endure to the end, you'll be saved. Then how can you be saved at the very beginning? Again, we've inherited notions of salvation. In the book of Jeremiah also, there's another comment where the people of Israel said, we are saved. And he said, no, you're not. You claim to be saved, and yet you don't keep my ways. Even James said, we say we love him, but then we don't do what he says. We are a liar. If we don't do what he says, we're a liar. And then I think it was the Psalms, he says, those who turn their ear from hearing the Torah, even their prayers are an abomination. You see, if we've inherited certain doctrines that don't match the Torah, that don't match what he said, then we have to question what it is we're hearing. So if he spends the entire Old Testament, read the book of Jeremiah, he says to his people, I told you the way it works. If you listen to my words, I will give you all these blessings. I would maintain that the blessings that he offers his people are inside this het. And so everything we're going to be talking about for the next 12 weeks, the 12 pieces inside the Mishkan between the het and the kuf, because the het is like the door coming into the container, and the kuf is like the lid over the top, the pillar of fire, pillar of smoke that was over the camp. That's why I'm picturing that as coming in, and then this lid between the het and the kuf. Het, tet, yod, kaf, lamed, mem, nun, samek, ayin, pei, zadi, kuf. The chok. If the Christian church is correct saying all the chok were done away with when Yeshua died, then we have to look at everything he said in Jeremiah. And when he said to the people through Jeremiah, when he says the king of Babylon's coming and he's going to be ferocious, he's going to be in a frenzy, and he's going to rip you all to shreds. What? Why would he do that to his people? He said, you've done it to yourself. It's not me doing it to you. You did it to yourself. You tied your own dead man on your back. And the only way to get the dead man off is to come back to my words. Come back to his words. And he says, you come back to my words. And he says, he'll come right back and he'll knock out our enemies for us. I could paraphrase what it says, but just go back and read the book of Jeremiah. And when you read it, look for the items that are the point. When he says, he's upset. Why? What's he say? And then a couple verses later, he says it again. A couple verses later, says it again. And it's always the same thing. You guys have ripped each other off, pillaged and tormented and oppressed each other, and you have turned your back away from my name and my day, and you've had other Baals with other festivals and other, what he calls Elohim Achrim, or the gods of others, or other deities that you don't know. And you're doing their thing instead of his thing. What's his thing? The Sabbath day and the festivals of Leviticus 23. Certain days you don't work. And certain days you say, the reason I'm not going to work this day is because he created the heavens and the earth in 6 days and rested the seventh. The seventh day Shabbat. Not 1 and 7. Not any day. The seventh day is his sign. He said, this is a sign between me and my people. Now you can take any seventh day off. You can take any day, no day. It's no burden to me. But he said the seventh day Sabbath is a sign between him and his people. It's like a certain wedding ring between him and his people. If you want to be his people, so who I'm speaking to here is anybody that wants to come to the kingdom of Yod He Vav He. If you don't want to come to his kingdom under his terms, you're free to invent any terms that you want for yourself, or listen to your favorite pastor, or your favorite church council, or your favorite Vatican decree, or your favorite rabbi. You can invent any terms you want and believe them, and you can hang your hope for eternity on those things that you've invented. And maybe they're true. But what if they're not? He gave us his word, and he says you can count on my word. As if there was nothing that he would give his own house that we could count on? That's one of the last things that David said, according to my translation. As if the creator of heaven and earth, who called Israel his own, says, you don't think that I would give you something trustworthy? My word? I'm sworn to keep my word by my own oath, swearing upon myself, because I can swear by no greater. I'm quoting various scriptures here, melded together. The word for 7 is the word for sworn oath. As we said before, to keep the festivals is a sworn oath. Yahweh invented them. He says, here's how you participate in my sworn oath. Keep the festivals. It's that hard. It's that easy. If we keep his festivals, is that the summit, the around and around, that's the key to the fence to get in? Do we have to keep the festivals? Do we have to earn our way in? I said before, read Leviticus 4 and 5, and it's all these sacrifices for unintentional sins. What about the intentional sins? Where we just go, I'm doing it because I want to. I'm doing it because somebody told me it didn't matter. I'm doing it because I just want to do it. Could it be that Yeshua died on the cross for the intentional sins? There was never stated a sacrifice for intentional sins. But I was talking to Keith here on the way up here. When we were kids playing hide and go seek, at the end of the game, it's time to come in. You say, all ye are in free. You know, that's an old English. All ye, all of you are in free. Now, if that's true, that Yeshua being lifted up and calling all his lost sheep, everybody, even the Gentiles who were never part of his fold, that want to come into the kingdom, if he says, okay, you're all in free. All your intentional sin paid for. Because the intentional sin had no sacrifice. Read Leviticus. The unintentional sin, once they realized, somebody came to them and said, look what you did. They go, oh man, I didn't know I did that. Okay, offer a sacrifice. But the intentional sin had a repercussion. The intentional sin's repercussion was death to the perpetrator, the one doing the intentional. The man who went out and picked up sticks right after Mount Sinai. And they said, oh man, he said, we're not supposed to work on the Sabbath day, and this guy's picking up sticks. What are we supposed to do with them? And Moses says, I don't know. Come on, you guys, what are you doing this stuff for? Let me go talk to Yahweh. So we go talk to Yahweh and say, what do we do with this guy? He's picking up sticks after you said not to. He says, kill him. It's called the high-handed sin. Kill him. So Yeshua, taking the death for all of our high-handed, in-your-face sins, calling us home to do what? To have no regard of any hulk anymore? Or what do? According to the pattern, because we can come in, because of Yeshua, the Vav man, Zion, outside, we can, like the drawbridge, we can come in, and the first thing, Hagai Matzot, the altar of sacrifice, the place where we learn what's inside the kingdom. The protocols of the kingdom. When we come in, it's to learn what his kingdom's all about. If we were told that we can come into the kingdom and that's it, it's party time, we can do anything we want because everything's forgiven, I would question whether that's so. And we should question whether it's so by comparing it to what the words say. The purpose of this is to come back and say, what are these words? So one might say, if this model of coming to the fence is to say, is it coming back to the Torah? Is it becoming Israel? Is it getting saved? Is it going to heaven? It's something hidden. Yahweh said, if they were exposed to my mystery, let them say my words. And so a fellow here was talking about the words that Paul was talking about in 2 Corinthians 2, about the hidden things. I don't know the exact quote you were mentioning. But the point is, you look back at Deuteronomy 29:29, and he says, those things which have been not revealed, well, those are under Yahweh, but what has been revealed is for us and our children to keep the words of this Torah. The first 7 letters has to do with, if we go back through briefly, Aleph is like this plan, has to do with who, what, why, how. It talks about these general issues. As we go through each letter, they're going to get more and more complex. So Bet has to do with being, has to do with evidence, has to do with materialization. Gimel then has to do with something in motion, specification like physics, mass, speed, velocity. It's the letter with a foot. So as he's designing the universe, you can see this progression in the letters. Dalet has to do with alternative, choice, destination, timing, threshold. It has to do with an occasion for the motion. He has to do with transference. Behold has to do with an inferred intention, manifestation, revelation. Vav goes down to a yoke, a balance, reciprocation. What you do is going to come back on you. Zion has to do with limitation, finity, a point of turning around, a point of coming to a stop and either going back like the weekly Sabbath. It has to do with filtration or osmosis, because when you get to the 7, the question is, do you come into this place or not? When you see Yeshua on the cross, you can choose to regard him or not. Now, if you were told the wrong thing about him, and you reject that wrong notion, does that mean you've rejected him? The Jews were told that Jesus died on the cross and did away with the covenant, did away with the Torah, eliminated the hook. And because they didn't see it, that now the Christians should murder them by the hundreds of thousands, by the millions? If a Jew rejects that Jesus, are they rejecting the Mashiach, the sent one? Are they rejecting the truth? Or are they rejecting a lie? If that's not who he was and what he came to do, for them to reject that story is not rejecting the Mashiach. It's rejecting a lie about the Mashiach. The reconciliation of the tribes must be according to the terms of the truth. For a Jew to come to Jesus, he must know that this guy that is perpetuated by the stories that have been told for the last 2,000 years is not necessarily true. So for any Christian to say, oh, the Jews are all going to hell. Why? Because they don't believe the lie? No. They're not necessarily going to hell. Maybe the Christians are going to hell because they've distorted the truth. And Yeshua himself said, any man who manufactures and perpetuates an untruth has no part in my kingdom. This is deadly serious matters. The reason why we are talking about the Shabbat and about the festivals is because they seem to be keyed to pure truth out of Yahweh's mouth. Kadosh matters. And I am not piggybacking on the back of Judaism by talking about Hebraic stuff, because the words from Mount Sinai were given to the 12 tribes of Israel. We each have our place. This is the inheritance of Abraham, Isaac, and Yaakov that was given to the people of Israel. Brother Yehuda has kept these words. What has the other tribes done? For us to come back to these words is to come back to the inheritance given to Israel. The Mashiach was sent to Israel. And when he opened it up to the Goyim, to the Gentiles who don't know the truth, the word Goy, as we said, you look in the Red Dictionary under Hey Gimel Vav, Hey Gimel Hey Hagah, Hago, it has to do with navigation and phonetics. It has to do with a rudder and a helm and steering. It also has to do with the tongue and meditation and thinking. Steering in life has to do with language. Steering into this kingdom has to do with right direction. And the Goy are those who have lost their way. And for Yeshua to be lifted up and say, now all of you in the entire world who have lost your way, come this way. Enter this kingdom because of the one who was lifted up, paying the penalty of those who were otherwise outcast and deserved the death sentence for intentional sin. Now they can come in here and learn the truth. And the truth is seen in the model of the Mishkan pattern. It's calibrated. The 7 days, the 7 festivals, the Mishkan, the Aleph Bet. It's all the same pattern. Thus, what I'm saying is that it is the proof that this stuff is of Yahweh. This is not my design. This is not Jewish. This is not Christian. Because the creator of the heavens and the earth determined these things from before the creation. This is a pattern that he made everything by and according to the pattern. And his son, B'nai, is wrapped up in the covenant. The covenant is the 22 letters expressed. His son, Yeshua, fully, perfectly manifested the 22 letters, the Torah, as all of us should. B'nai Israel, his son Israel, should also be manifesting everything he said in the perfect form. The word Urim and Thummim is translated as 2 stones put behind the breastplate of the high priest. I didn't try to make a breastplate of the high priest with the 12 stones. There's an interesting story about, this is an American Indian-style bone breastplate. There's a story they've been talking about on the radio from time to time. Late 1800s, I believe. I think at least 3, maybe a half a dozen or so Indians came from the Pacific Northwest, and they came all the way to, I believe it was either St. Louis or Washington, but they came quite a ways because they heard that the Americans had the book from heaven. Have you heard this on the radio talking about? They said, we have come because we have heard you have the books from heaven, and our people are languishing. And yet, since we've been here, this was actually a speech that one of these guys read as he left. He said, since we've been here, you've given us trinkets and objects to carry that are so heavy we're going to wear our moccasins out before we ever get back home. But you have not given us the book from heaven. You have not given us any insight to it at all. And now we're going to go back and we're going to tell our people that we have failed in our mission. You haven't given us the truth. Did the white man, the Americans, did they keep it from them? Or did they not know? Or were they confused? Or were they ignorant? Why didn't we give them the answer? Why didn't we give them the truth? Why did these American Indians have to go back home to their people with nothing and watch their people languish? There's a certain tribe called the Lummi Indians, and apparently those are on the Washington coast, I guess, or the islands out there. Lummi. The interesting thing about that, the phonetics of the word Lummi is very similar to, isn't it Hosea, where he says they have three children. One was called Lo-Ami, Lo, Lamed Aleph, Ayin, Mem, Yod. Ayin, Mem is people. This means my people. And this means not. Lo-Ami means not my people. He says, in the same place where it was once said of you, you are not my people, Lo Ruhama, I will not have mercy. And Jezreel, Yahweh will scatter. He says, I will bring you back, and it will be said of you, you are my people. Yahweh has promised to bring us back. And the people that want his words, like the American Indians, to come to the Christian nation and ask for the words from heaven and to receive nothing but trinkets. It's profanity. It's our shame. Why don't we give them the truth? Maybe we didn't have the truth. The purpose of this class is to say, I don't believe we have that excuse anymore. I think that Yahweh has opened up the windows of heaven to show us what he designed from the beginning and given it to us in his language. And the key to it is acknowledging the Sabbath day and the festivals. Without the Sabbath day, it blows the whole thing apart. If you don't have the festivals keyed right, it blows the whole pattern apart. The Sabbath day and the festivals keyed to the Mishkan make everything work. And yet, if he did away with it all, then what have we got? Do we have any way to reckon anything if he did away with this stuff? Again, read through Jeremiah. It talks about him bringing these matters back. Just as a little light-hearted sort of a thing, there was one thing I was going to show you here. Somebody asked a question about determining words that were not necessarily in the dictionary, and how do you do it? I maintain that every word that exists as a phonetic utterance, there's a picture that everything in creation is like in a bowl, in a sphere. You know, you go east and you end up in the west. You go up, you end up down and coming back. He created our minds so we can't get out of this loop. No matter how far you think, you end up in this loop. Every language came out of Hebrew. Every phonetic came out of Hebrew. So I think that anything you think about in any language, you're going to encounter his stuff. Now, when we talked about Hebrew in the very beginning, I suggested, what if you could read the Hebrew alphabet as a word? In John 1:1 in the Gospel, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with Elohim, and the Word was Elohim. And I said, well, look, if the Infinite One, the Ein Sof, revealed himself in these 22 letters, then all we know of him is that when we reference these 22 letters, we're referencing him. So if that word became flesh and dwelt among us, which is Yeshua, then when we see him, he was with Elohim. We reference him as Elohim, and it kind of solves that puzzle. But you have to think about that a little bit. So here's another one. If you were going to say the words, remember the first 7 words are kind of like indicators. And I just went through them kind of briefly. I don't know if that was very easy to reckon with. But if you say the word Aleph, and they all have kind of an ah sound. The Masoretic scribes put lines and dots, and those are other vowels that are E's and I sounds. But basically, if everything has an ah sound, right? So and with a letter bet would be a ba, that would be a ga, dalet, excuse me, abagada. Something in my mind goes to, hey, there's a song in the 60s by Iron Butterfly, Inagata Davida. Inagata Davida, baby, don't you know that I love you? It's like, Inagata Davida, what does that mean? I don't know what language that's in. But look at this, just to play around. Here. Abagada, ha, va, za, abagada, havaza. And then you get a chet, but a chet, remember, has an opening, an entrance, the 4-colored embroidered door, which is a bet, baby, right? Bet is a gateway or an entrance. There's 3 other words that mean a gateway or entrance. Abagada Havaza, Bobby. Don't you know that I love you? Sounds like I'm speaking English, right? Let me show you something here. I'm just playing around to lighten it up. Here you go. Look at this. If you wrote this word, Dalet, Ayin, Vav, Nun. Don, Tav, Yod, Aleph, Hey, Tia, Nun, Vav, Dalet, Ayin, Noda, Tav, Aleph, Yod, Tai, Lamed, Bet, Love, Yod, Aleph, Vav, You. Don, Tia, No, Da, Tai, Love You. This is what it would mean. This word basically means one who applies wisdom, he will become befitted, properly, well-known, famous, or evident, come into like a cell or compartment or my room or my private place like a theater box. This is the word for heart, and this is the word for he will long for or desire. And you can look all these words up in the Red Dictionary, and you might have to piece them together. To put them all together, it says, Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zion, the entrance to the Mishkan, one who applies wisdom, he will become properly befitted and be known by the evidence of the wisdom of regarding my words. Come to my personal, private compartment, innermost heart. It's his desire. He will long for it. So here by saying, Abagada Havaza Bava, don't you know that I love you? It's actually speaking Hebrew for the ultimate truth of what it means to come to Yahweh's kingdom. If you want to apply wisdom, you come to the kingdom and it will modify you, it will change you, properly fit, and you will become known by the wisdom that it gives you, which is exactly what Yahweh said back at Mount Sinai. You keep these instructions, and all the nations of the world will look at you and say, is there anyone so wise, any kingdom so fit, so glorious? Everything wraps up. And so here I'm taking this little English thing, playing with the phonetics. I also did, not to do it now, but the Star-Spangled Banner. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light? Sounds like I'm speaking English, but if you break down the phonetics into Hebrew, it tells a whole different thing. It sounds like one of the Proverbs. Just to say, you could take any phonetic, anything you can utter, and because it's in our mouth, if you know Hebrew, you can't get away from the truth. And the truth is, return to the Torah of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, get the dead man off your back, learn his ways, and live. And he will turn things around. And I could show you verse after verse, which even today, with the circumstances of the world upon us, if Yahweh's word is true, he said he will get our enemies off our back, that he will make nature cooperate. Things could turn around. Now, whether or not it will, I think has to do with us and has to do with whether we believe his word and will do our behavior accordingly. And the purpose of this talk is to speak to the world, the rest of the lost tribes, the lummi that were scattered across the face of the earth, and say, let's return to the Torah. Let's do each other chesed and keep Yahweh's name and his day, his festivals with high regard, at least to proclaim them. If we stumble about trying to keep them, that's different than honoring them. Anyway, Jamie, so we're at the end of the occasion here. Just for what it's worth, one of the reasons why I actually had the idea to make this was out of regard for the people. Stephen Collins' work is that a lot of the American Indians actually came from Israel. The people of Israel it says in the scriptures, they will forget where they came from. They will forget they were ever the people of Israel. They will forget that they were ever part of the Torah, and they will take on what they think is just the heritage of all these peoples that have nothing to do with this. But Yahweh says, I know where every single one is, and he's going to call and bring them back. We don't know who we're disparaging. And when somebody like this story that they talk about with these Indians came to Washington and say, can we have the words from heaven? What a travesty that we didn't give them the words. And as I say, I can point the finger and try to say, why you... No pointing the finger. This isn't about pointing any fingers at anybody for anything. This is a matter of saying, if this is true, that these words are really Yahweh's words, which I believe they are, this is like the greatest gold mine treasure on the face of the earth. If this is keyed truly to the things that were made, Yahweh's plan before the creation of the universe, then that makes this Hebrew alphabet, think about it, it's older than the stars, because it says, let's see, on day 4, I will put the stars in the sky. And so if this is older than the stars, this is the oldest piece of archaeology anywhere in the universe. This Hebrew alphabet comes from heaven before the earth was made, before there was a man on the face of the earth. As a matter of fact, one way to render, if I can, the first word Bereshit, I think I might have done this before, but let me do it here. Bet Resh Aleph Shin Yod Tav. Bet, it can be rendered as in. The letter bet means in. Resh. Well, if you figure that the word Resh is at the end of the alphabet, after the Kuf, right? The Kuf is like the pillar of fire. The Kuf means after this. Resh Shin Tav. Resh, our shining Elyon. Resh, the exalted one. You see in the book of Revelation, Yeshua coming back. That's the exalted man. That's the Resh man. That's the Vav man who was slain, coming back, who lives forever, our glorious King, shining Shin Tav, accomplishing the covenant. The Resh man is a picture of the Mashiach coming back. It's the letter after the Kuf. Bet first. That's the first plan from before the creation event. Before the bet, the plan was to put in Resh. Shin is to provide or to equip. Yod Tav, my covenant. In Messiah first. El Shaddai, Shin, provided who? Resh with my covenant. El Shaddai established, fit, built the covenant. So who is Resh? Right there you can read the word Bereshit as saying the Resh man, that he is the prototype, the archetype, the icon that we should all be conformed to the image of. He is the one who is fitted as the embodiment, the materialization of the covenant, which is the 22 letters, which is simply doing what he said to do. Regarding his name, regarding his day, regarding his festivals, regarding doing hesed to one another. And to finish the thing that I was saying about the Resh Ayin, the reason why the word for wickedness, distress, and harm is the same for neighbor and compatriot and associate is because evil is defined as what you do to your neighbor to cause him distress and harm and to bring him down. That's what evil is. Righteousness is doing what Yahweh said. Evil is oppressing your neighbor and making him feel rotten. Pretty simple in those terms. If the ayin has to do with Judgment Day, the scales, and he says Resh is the exalted man, or what you get later on after this time on earth is what you're going to be conformed to, it's going to be conformed to the scales of how you treated one another. So he says, if you want a good resurrection, you do chesed. The word chassid is a play off of chesed, only it's got an extra yod in there. And we think about the black hats, the Jews that wear those, they're pious, they're orthodox. They're the ones that are trying to do kindness. They're trying to do chesed. And we call them now the Hasids, as if it was a form of derision. Those guys carry their reputation that they're trying to do Yahweh's devout, pious righteousness to one another. They should be applauded, not mocked. We have no idea what those guys are doing, and we're saying, they're Jews, they're all going to hell. We're insane to say stuff like that. We don't even know the Scriptures. We should learn the Scriptures and hope to be called a Hasid. That means that we stake our reputation on one who would be known as, he does mercy and kindness and justice and righteousness to his neighbor. And if that's the scales by which our exalted status will be weighed, we better hope to be found doing this. Instead of saying, it doesn't matter, all my sins are forgiven. Being forgiven is not the same thing as being weighed in the scales. A big distinction.